Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining. We're going to go ahead and start presenting, and we're going to start off with Martin Blackman.
Thanks, Amy. Good evening, everybody. We've got a very, very exciting topic and list of presenters here this evening. The title for this evening's forum is Empathetic Coaching. We're actually going to be covering three elements that are related to empathetic coaching. First, positive coaching, empathetic coaching, and emotional intelligence. This is something that we have been really focused on in player development for the last year and a half. It's something that we felt we needed to get better in, a skill that we needed to be intentional in developing. And when we talk about positive coaching, we're really talking about coaches having a bias towards using affirmation and guided discovery and working with their players. There are always going to be times when you have to correct players, but we really feel that affirmation and guided discovery are really the places where you want to begin to make that process positive and enjoyable for the player. Empathetic coaching obviously relates to putting yourself in your player's shoes, really understanding what they're going through, what pressures they're feeling, what it felt like perhaps for you to be a player and be in that situation. And then lastly, emotional intelligence, really related to timing, tone, and context, making sure that you understand where your player is emotionally and are choosing the right time and the right words to make an impact on them. So this evening we've got three gentlemen who are very skilled in this area. Their experience, what they've done with players, what they've experienced, really makes them an authority in this area, and I'm really looking forward to learning from them. First of all, we've got Brian Barker. Brian, as many of you know, coached James Blake for 17 years, from the juniors all the way to his rise to number 5 in the world. Brian has a great background. As a player, was ranked number 1 in New England, top 20 in the juniors, went on to play for the University of South Carolina, where because of his leadership skills was named captain and 2-time MVP of that Division I team, and now leads a tournament training program at the tennis club of Trumbull in Connecticut. So Brian, really, really appreciate you making the time to be on this call. Looking forward to learning from you this evening. Next, we've got Dustin Taylor. Dustin recently rejoined player development in our Team USA Pro department. Dustin was a standout collegiate player at the University of Tulsa, 4-time All-Western Athletic Conference honoree, and a 2003 All-American. Prior to joining the USTA, Dustin was a professional coach for several top 100 players, including Ryan Sweeting, Robert Kendrick, and Tim Smyczek. In 2017, Dustin was named ITA National Assistant Coach of the Year and had a tremendous amount of success at UVA working with Brian Boland, where he was the associate head coach. So we're really happy to have Dustin back on our player development team. And again, Dustin is one of the best in this field in terms of positive and empathetic coaching. And lastly, I want to introduce Larry Lauer, Dr. Larry Lauer. He's our mental skills specialist on our USTA player development team. Dr. Lauer has a PhD in exercise and sports science, specializing in sports psychology with that degree from the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. He's been a sports psychology consultant for over a decade, working with elite players, junior, collegiate, and pro. And lastly on Larry, this is a great honor. he was named one of the top 100 most influential sports educators in America by the Institute for International Sport. So with that, let me just get into some logistics before I hand it over to Larry. We ask you to submit your questions throughout the webinar by typing in the Q&A pod. We'll either answer them this evening or after the webinar. During the Q&A from 9 to 9:15, you can again submit those questions, and you can always send us an email at teamusa@usda.com. So looking forward to getting into the program and learning from our great presenters. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Lauer. Thanks a lot, Larry.
Thank you, Martin. I appreciate it. And a real honor to be on the call tonight with you and the two other presenters, Dustin and Brian. I think it's going to be a great session. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. Our focus is on empathetic coaching and just sort of its role that it plays in a tennis coach's work with his or her players. And I think the first place to start with this is getting hung up on the word empathetic, but realizing this is about coaching that makes a difference in the lives of people who are your athletes, helping them become their best. That's what we're talking about tonight. How can you get the most out of people in a way that they feel inspired, better because of you, that when you walk in there, they become a better person? And that's the kind of coaching we're talking about. It's the kind of coaching that we've been working on at National, as Martin addressed. And I want to talk about a little bit here at the front end, just maybe some stories and some principles to that, but I'm going to really leave it to Brian and Dustin to really talk about the real-life stories that are happening that have made a difference in their lives and their players' lives. The other thing to remember, if we do have coaches or parents on here tonight, these are the kinds of things that you can use as a parent as well. But let me start with a story. I used to live in Michigan. I worked at Michigan State University. I also ran my own consulting company. As Martin mentioned, I'm a sports psychology trained professional. At that time, I was working with, yes, tennis, but also ice hockey and many different sports in the area, in the state of Michigan and across the country. And I was working with a number of coaches in the greater Lansing area in the capital of Michigan. And I was at the rink one day, just passing through, and I ran into one of the coaches that I knew from a coaching program. And he stopped me and he said, Larry, you got to hear this story. I said, okay, it's going to be good. And he said, I had this kid on my team, and he was a leader on the team, a captain, just a kid that would do everything that you would ask him to do. Would work, was the hardest worker, came early, stayed late, was totally bought into the team. And then it changed. The kid stopped working as hard. The kid was sulking. The kid wasn't giving the same effort. And the coach was perplexed. But unlike many coaches, the coach didn't make this kid skate wall to wall and wall until he punished him until the kid gave in. He pulled the kid aside in private and said, son, what's going on? I see that you're not trying as hard. Your attitude is different. I'm concerned. And this young man, who was probably 16, said to his coach, you know what, my dad cheated on my mom and is having an affair. And I just haven't felt right, and I feel terrible, and I haven't been able to focus at practice. And that coach told me, he said, Larry, had I not asked that question, if I had not taken the time to try to understand my player, I would have lost him. But instead what happened is he saved that relationship, that coach-athlete relationship, and went to a deeper level because he asked that question. He cared to understand before he punished. He cared to understand before he assumed that, here's another lazy kid when they turn 16, they get a car, and they want to hang out and not play hockey anymore. He looked deeper. He asked questions. And that was the difference between another adult who just kind of tells kids what to do and punishes them for not acting the way they want, and instead was an adult who had his back, who was there for him, listened to him, and really cared about him. And that changed the whole thing. And once they had that conversation, this kid's effort level, his intensity, his leadership came back. His attitude went back to where it was because the coach cared to listen. That is empathetic coaching, that's positive coaching, and that's the kind of coaching that changes lives. And that's what we're talking about tonight. How are we as coaching changing lives? We know that coaches, when you ask kids to rank the most important people in their lives, the coaching come out close to the top. We did this in Detroit when I worked at Michigan State, and we asked kids, okay, who are the most important people? And typically they'd say their parents, obviously, maybe a grandparent, an uncle, an aunt. Wasn't too long before the coach came in at number 2, number 3. That is how important you are and what a difference you can make. And then think about some of the players that you work with who you spend hours upon hours with a year. And what kind of change are you making in that person? How are you inspiring them, motivating them, making a difference? Now, this isn't something I can prescribe. I can't give you the formula. But what I know it does come down to is developing a relationship with your athlete. And when you do that, based on trust, based on credibility, based on empathy and understanding, then you can change lives and inspire young people. Martin mentioned our efforts to really focus on positive coaching. And sorry, someone can mute there.
You can just create a live form and coaching.
Hi,
Please,
everyone please mute their phone. Thank you.
Hey, it's bound to happen on every call one time at least, so it's all right. But positive coaching is really about inspiring, motivating, and transforming people. That's what we do. We don't necessarily teach just forehands, backhands, serves, volleys, overheads. We teach, we also coach, and we transform people. And for me, positive coaching is, it's coaching, it's teaching, it's using principles that put the person first. You're putting their interest first in this deal. So let's really try here to summarize what I talked about and get moving again. Positive coaching is about inspiring, motivating, and transforming people, as I mentioned. To do that, you need to have emotional intelligence. You must be able to perceive your own emotions and understand them, but also you need to be able to perceive and understand the emotions of other people, and then be able to communicate back to them what it is that you're seeing. And so emotionally intelligent people can be very positive coaches because they're able to read other people, they're able to understand them, and they're able to communicate that back so people feel heard, they feel understood. So emotional intelligence is very important here, as is empathy, being empathetic. And empathy is understanding where other people are coming from. It's understanding them. It's putting yourself in their shoes. And I'll give you a definition of empathetic coaching. Using coaching to understand the situation, the perceptions, feelings of another person, and then being able to communicate that back to that person. That's what we're talking about. Being able to hear, read a person, understand them, and then communicate that back. That is huge in a coach-athlete relationship because it's the difference between the player feeling like you're with them and not necessarily feeling like you really trust them or are with them, believe in them. I think that's very important, using empathetic coaching to get to that part of it. What does empathetic coaching include? What kind of skill sets do you need? Well, I think that's already been mentioned with my first story, the hockey coach, asking questions, very important. And I think probably the presenters will talk about that tonight. But what kind of questions are we talking about? We're talking about open-ended questions. Ones where there's multiple things that could be said and not just one right answer or right or wrong answer. Open-ended questions allow young people to explore their thoughts and their opinions and their ideas and give them a chance to basically make a case for what they are doing or what they believe, which is very important in critical thinking and developing decision-making skills and independence as well as belief in your skills to be independent. Also, asking divergent questions, ones that can go either way, so it's not, again, just a leading question, but you could go multiple ways. I think that's important. Listening, and I won't go deep into this. We could spend an hour on listening, but the ability to actively listen and be engaged with the person, making eye contact, letting them know that you're there with them, that you're with them, that you're there to understand them. Active listening is effort. It's hard work to listen intently and be with everybody's words and their nonverbals and their posture to really understand the person. But that is being empathetic, is you're there with them and you're looking at their body language, you're understanding what they're saying, but also accessing their emotion. What is this person
All
feeling?
guests have been unmuted.
And now, if listening is important in skill, then there's honesty. And with honesty, empathetic coaching to me is not weak. It's not, unicorns and rainbows. It's very honest. It's very genuine. But it's done in a very positive way where I understand you, but I also may disagree with you. There also may be standards that I believe are so important that even though you have a different viewpoint, that we need to follow these standards or expectations. So let's not get the wrong idea. Positive coaches, empathetic coaches can be tough and are tough, but they criticize the behavior, they criticize the performance, not the personality or the person. Very important that they do it in this way, because then the player doesn't feel like they're being attacked, that their being as a person is under attack, being judged, and that is crucial. And that takes me to my next point, being non-judgmental. Empathetic coaches are accepting of other people's thoughts and emotions, that they can exist. And just because a player has a different viewpoint doesn't make it bad or awful or make them wrong. They can have different viewpoints. They can feel certain ways. When I'm in a practice, a player can get angry. That's fine. Anger is a normal part of human behavior and emotion, but it's all about how you respond to it. So it's not being a pushover. It's saying, I accept that you're angry, but I also expect a positive, productive response from you to your anger. That's being empathetic, and it's being positive, but that's also still being a tough coach, which I think is important, not lowering your standards. We found this in a study we did at UNC Greensboro, where we interviewed 9 very successful high school football coaches who were nominated for NFL High School Football Coach of the Year. And all these coaches talked about tough love and how they understood their players and they got to know them as people, but there were certain standards that they weren't going to back off of. And I think this is very important, this whole discussion of empathy, that we're understanding people, but we can disagree in a very positive, respectful way. Patience is important in all this. Empathetic coach will take not only the time to listen and paraphrase back to the players so they know that they're being heard, but also to be patient with their development. They understand growth and development because they understand the person. They understand where they're coming from. This person may not get something as fast as your previous player. And while you push that learning curve and try to accelerate it, you must understand how the person learns, how they're maturing, where they're at, what stage they're in. That's being understanding and not just putting one label on every single person. And I think that's important. Being realistic about the rates of change that people can go through, but also believing in their ability to change over time. Then kind of the hallmark of empathetic coaching is remembering what you were like when you were 16, 17, the things that you were going through. And that helps to give perspective and give you that little bit of patience, like, okay, I'm not going to jump down this person's throat because I kind of remember the way I was. And finally, is putting yourself in their shoes, taking their perspective. psychologists would talk about perspective taking, is going through this cognitive process of saying, okay, from what I know about this person, how do I think they're looking at this situation? What are they feeling in this situation? And trying to understand it. You may not agree with those things, but you're understanding and accepting that it can exist. And that gives an empathetic coach a much greater chance to help their player get through difficulties, get through challenges, be heard, be inspired, and stay passionate about their sport. So that's kind of a summary beginning to this. So what I want to do now is I want to hand it over to Coach Brian Barker. Great coach. He's got a lot of great ideas. I'm sure you're going to enjoy his presentation tonight. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to Brian. So thanks, everyone.
Okay. Larry, thanks a lot for that. I agree completely with everything that you said. Sorry that your sister went out there for a bit, because I was curious with every word you had to say. So I was asked to answer a couple questions. And you guys asked me, what does empathy mean to me? So there's a lot of things, but I just picked a couple. For one, get to know the individual, not just the player. And just like the story that you were talking about, I couldn't agree more with that. When I was a young coach, certainly I made a mistake. Many times someone would show up and I would start to coach them. And a couple days before, they'd be playing unbelievable tennis. They'd show up on that day, they couldn't hit a forehand or a backhand. I'd start to try to correct them, and I'd find that they're getting worse. And obviously that's not what you want as a coach, for someone to get worse and you're trying to help them. And eventually I would get to the point where I'd ask them enough questions, find out what was going on in their life. Sure enough, they had a terrible night's sleep, or they got in a huge fight with their parents, or they failed a test, whatever it might be. So I couldn't agree more. And I would say a third of the time that I go to coach someone and they're having problems, it has nothing to do with tennis at all. It just has to do with what's going on in their personal life. So if I could straighten that out, immediately they become better tennis players and start playing better, which is the whole idea. Build trust first. Probably nothing is more important than building trust. If the player doesn't trust you, they're not going to tell you their inner thoughts. So much of tennis and winning and losing has to do with pressure, people getting nervous, not being able to play their best under pressure. And if you talk to the kids enough and they trust you, they'll eventually tell you what you need to know to help them. Ways, I think, to gain a player's trust. First of all, some you can gain their trust in a day or two. Others it takes a month or two or longer. It depends on what they think of you. Ways to gain people's trust. I think they notice how you treat other people and how you talk about other people. So I really try to make a point to never say anything negative about any player, anywhere, any place, anytime, no matter what. Just have nothing negative come out of my mouth. If someone can't hit a backhand over the net, I try to never say in front of a player, like, I can't believe this person can't hit a backhand, I wonder what they're doing, or why are they going crazy and behaving so poorly. So I just figure that the players are going to think if I'm talking about other players, I'm probably going to talk about them, which is probably true. So I try to do that to build their trust. Another way I try to build their trust is all kids and all people obviously have problems with stress and handling pressure. And one of the things I find, the kids, once they trust me, most everyone I've ever coached at some point comes up to me and says, like, Brian, I got to tell you, like, there's something seriously wrong with me. Like, I have serious problems. Like, I get so nervous. Like, you don't understand how nervous I get. I can't even function. And then I immediately just tell them about, my insecurities or things that make me nervous, or times that I was nervous on the tennis court. And I figure if I want them to tell me things, I have to tell them things. So I'll talk about, I played matches before where my legs are so heavy I can't even move them. I'm trying to move my feet. People have come off the court. People have said, I can't believe you didn't try today. It's like, I couldn't have tried harder. I never wanted to win more. So my legs were so heavy, and I couldn't move. So I think by sharing stories when coaches share stories with their players about struggles that they've had, it makes them really open up and feel better about themselves, and that brings on the relationship, moves it forward. The player always comes before the coach. Like you were saying, Larry, I think listening to your player and understanding what gets them better, what helps them improve, that's what it's all about. Our goal as coaches is to make the player as good as they can be. With every player I've ever had, I just feel like when they're done, if they feel like they couldn't be any better, and they reach their potential, and that's the best I could have done. And because of that reason, I don't have any particular strategy. Some kids are more rah-rah, you have to fire them up. Other kids get extremely nervous before a match, just have to calm them down, make them feel better about themselves. Everyone has different style of forehand, backhand, serve. So really, every single person is coached completely different. And I have to reinvent myself. The player's in charge. They're who they are, and they have the problems or strengths that they have, and I need to work with them to get the most out of them, and not the other way around. Next frame. So I was asked to tell about a story where I showed empathy. So as you said, I was lucky to coach James Blake for many years, and he was just one of many, hundreds of kids that I've coached. I feel extremely fortunate because he was obviously a phenomenal athlete and a phenomenal player. But just one story that comes to mind when I think of a tough time he had in showing empathy. James is, after 1 year on the tour, he's ranked about 350 in the world. After 2 years, he's ranked about 150. So there's certainly lots of losing, lots of tough times, lots of times I had to pick him up. And so now, at this point, the story, he's 3 years into playing. He's playing in the Australian Open. He's never won a round in a major tournament. He's ranked about 85 in the world. And he plays a seed, Alex Corretja, first round, who's about the 15th seed. And James plays some unbelievable tennis and ends up beating Corretja. At this point in his career, he had never won a match in a major, certainly never beat a seed in a major. So, and Corretja had destroyed him about 6 months ago. So it was a big deal. Next match is playing a guy who's Stefan Kubek, who's ranked about 20 spots ahead of him. And, Stefan's supposed to win. I'm thinking, I wonder, is James going to play like as well as he did last match, or like, more like he plays most of the time. So James comes out firing, wins the first 2 sets easily, goes up a break in the third, 3-1, and he's really just destroying him. And I'm thinking, like, this is incredible. Like, he's on a roll. He's going to kill this guy. Unfortunately, as soon as I thought that, he also thought that, got a little bit ahead of himself, let down for just a game, got broke, a little panic sets in, gets broke again, loses that set, mind starts racing, loses the second set pretty quick. Now Stefan's playing unbelievable tennis. He has a second wind, kind of blows him off the court. Third set starts, James gets broken early, digging in, trying 100%. And then the moment got to be too big. He just rushed through it. The match was over with quickly, hard on himself, getting a little angry, running through points, and in no time it's over, gets killed the 5th set. So he goes off the court, and part of me is thinking, oh boy, people have already been saying, Brian Barker never played a high level on the tour. Is he good enough to coach this guy? James, is doing so well. Maybe James needs a new coach. And so those things are racing through my head. And then my next thought is, Brian, don't think about yourself and how this is going to look for you. You got to help James. So I run into the locker room, and the media person comes out. James is sitting in the corner. He's got the towel over his head. And he's just saying, I stink, I'm terrible, I can't do this, I'm not good enough, I can't do it. It's too hard. I can't do it. I'm terrible. I just keep saying over and over. The media person comes over. We'd like to talk to James. We'd like to talk to him right now. It has to be right now. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I need to talk to him for a minute, calm him down. So I just started talking to him. I was like, James, you're doing unbelievable. This is literally your first time winning a match at a major. It's your first time beating a seed at a major. And then it was your first time being up 2-1 or 2-0 in the second round. And I said, I think it was as simple as you just got ahead of yourself and your mind started racing a little bit. You started playing unbelievable and the match just got away. And it's as simple as that. And you're going to be fine. You're going to do well. Just being super positive. I reminded of when he was playing as a 17-year-old at Kalamazoo. First round, he lost 6-1, 6-0. He's ranked around 50 in the country. He loses 6-1, 6-0 first round. A year later, he's the #1 player in the country, and he gets to the finals of Kalamazoo. I was like, James, you can do this. You just need to go through things. He lost that match in the finals, and I think he just wasn't ready for that match. And then 2 years after that, I reminded him when he was in college, his first round in the NCAA tournament, his first year in the NCAA tournament, he played and he lost 6-3, 6-0 in no time. Did the same thing, rushed through it, wasn't feeling good about himself, wasn't feeling good about his game. Then I reminded him 1 year later, he was the #1 player in college and got to the finals of the NCAAs. Actually didn't pull that match out either, but finished #1 in the country. And I just had to remind him, James, once you go through things, you got it. Like, you're one of the quickest learners I know. You're one of the most mentally tough people I know. Tomorrow's going to be a tough day. People are going to be asking you questions. You're going to wish you're in the tournament. But look at it as how unbelievably great you're doing. You're doing amazing. You had a great tournament, your best major ever. You beat a seed. You should feel good about yourself. His next tournament was in Hawaii. And I told him, let's go to Hawaii. It was a challenger. And let's just have fun. Let's enjoy it. Hawaii is beautiful. You've never been there. And as luck would have it, he was calm. He enjoyed every minute of it. He ended up winning that tournament, and then rolled along and went from there. So, yeah, we need to pick people up, be empathetic, and be positive. And then quickly, how do we do that, or what skills do we use? It's important to have a genuine interest in each individual, as Larry was saying. And my coaching philosophy is I just try to coach everyone that I work with as if they were my son or daughter. So what I really want for them is I want them to be happy. I want them to be happy people. I want them to be good in tennis, but obviously most people aren't going to become professionals. So I want them to be happy. And happy, joyful people, it just so happens, play better tennis. And because, like we said, pressure is such a big part of whether the kids do well or not, it's important that that we just use tennis as a way it fits into their life. If you have a big senior prom coming up in a small tennis tournament, it's better to go to the senior prom because that's going to take pressure off all your other tournaments, going to make you feel good about yourself, you're going to enjoy your life, etc. Next, ask them non-tennis related questions. As Laura was saying, it's important to know, about the individual. Even when I'm coaching them on the tennis court, I always ask them about their life and how it's going, because I know, kids just feel so much pressure with tennis. One of the things that so many students tell me is that it drives me crazy when my parents talk about tennis all the time. They talk about tennis, it just makes me so nervous. Every single day they ask me a question, I get tighter and tighter and tighter, and I just can't stand it. And I'll go to the parents and just say, your son or daughter, it might be good not to talk tennis every single day. And then a lot of times I put forward, I said, let's try to see if you can go 1 week without talking tennis. And the parents are like, I can do that. And then often they come back to me and say, I can't do that. I can't go for a week. Like, I can't believe it. Like, you're right. We probably talk about it way too much. I was like, well, if you want your kids to play, some of these parents tell me their kids get nervous in matches or they don't reach their potential. And I just said, well, one of the ways you can have them play much better tennis is just not to talk about it so much, not have it be such a big part of their lives. That way they can relax more. And finally, always remember window mirror. It's just something I read years ago, and it's just basically when the players are playing great, look at them through a window. Know that they did it, they did the hard work, they worked on their strokes, they did everything that they need to do to prepare and to win those matches or win those tournaments, and you should just kind of get out of the way. And when your student isn't doing well, they're getting too angry, their backhand's breaking down, whatever it might be, as a coach you have to look in the mirror and say, like, what am I doing wrong? I'm doing something wrong. It's not them. They're who they are. They came to me like they are. I need to try to help them. That's my job. It's up to me to get them to the next level and to be the best they can be. And, along those lines, when James is doing well, I would just try to disappear. If he'd win a tournament, I would just kind of try to be gone because it's his time. He did it, all the hard work, and I don't want to share in it. And when he wasn't playing well, I would try to step in and take some of the blame. At times when he was struggling, I remember when he was top 10 in the world, and he went to Indian Wells, lost first or second round. Went to Miami, lost first or second round, and he lost to players ranked way below him. They were really upset, and he went to the locker room, and I ran there behind him, and there were reporters there, and I was talking to him and just telling him what was going on. It's like, yeah, it's tough to be ranked this high. There's a lot of pressure, and he had other things going on in his life as well. But I was just talking to him about James is doing everything he can. Maybe I should be doing some things different. Maybe I'm overtraining him. Maybe he's overplaying. I have to look within myself. So, yeah, there's something I always like to keep in mind, a window mirror. Yeah, that's some of my basic thoughts. So I'll turn it over to Dustin now.
Thank you, Brian. Can everyone hear me? Brian, can you hear me? Hello?
Hey, Dustin, it's Larry. You're good to go. We can hear you.
You can hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Larry, and thank you, Brian. A quick Brian Barker story. I was I don't know if you remember this one, but I was a 28-year-old coach out on tour, coaching Robert Kendrick at Wimbledon and looking up to James and all those top guys and thinking, their coaches are way out there. And I'm in the locker room one day, and I'd gotten to know Brian a little bit, but Brian came over and said, hey, DT, could you come look at James's slice? He's struggling out on the grass. And that's something that I will never forget. I went out there, and of course I saw nothing but wonderful, beautiful slices. But it said a lot about Brian Barker, and when I was asked to do this, it was pretty fitting that Brian would be a part of it, because he was a coach out with James that a lot of us young coaches looked up to, and we all have Brian Barker stories of him being very humble and empathetic to James and really leading them in a great direction. So thank you, Brian, for being a part of it, and thank you, Larry. And that following morning, I got a chance to sit down with Coach Peter Smith, and I congratulated him, obviously, but I had a few questions for him, and one of those questions was, what was it this year? What did you feel like got you over the hump? And of course, being still a young coach, I was looking for, Hoffman got it together at one, and he really propelled us, and Ray was a great senior, and he really developed into a great leader. And this guy's forehand got better, and this and that, and he looked over to me and said, DT, I don't know if we were the best team this year or even this week, but what I do know is that we loved each other more than everybody else. And for me, that really stuck with me. That really hit me square in the nose. And we can feed all the balls we want. We can work on the tennis all we want, but if the players don't feel the love, if the players don't feel the belief, if the players don't feel the empathy, I don't really think we're going to get the best out of those forehands and backhands. Fast forward 3 months later, I left the USTA in the summer of 2014, and I went to work at the University of Virginia. Amazing opportunity to work under Coach Bolin, his staff, and a very young and talented group of players that had just lost in the semifinals to that USC team. Spent my last night at the U.S. Open, part of the USTA, flew home that night, got in my car the next morning, and drove 15 hours up to Charlottesville, Virginia to make a 6 p.m. team dinner, and of course it was at the Bolin household. And Brian asked me to address the team, and I wasn't too prepared, but and I looked on the participants list, and Peter Smith's not on this call, but I do apologize to him. I proceeded to tell the team that I had just sat with Peter Smith the day after the final and 2 days after they beat them, and he proceeded to tell me that their team won the national championship this year because they loved each other more than everyone else, and that was going to be my goal for that team moving forward. So fast forward to this year. I'm pretty sure, with all due respect to Coach Bolin, but I have a feeling that talk he probably didn't remember. But his theme this year for the 2017 team was that love was going to win, and that the team that loves each other the most will stand at the end. And how we were going to get there, this is where it all ties in. We needed to have empathy for one another, and that's really what I wanted to share with you all tonight. Martin and I happened to have a lunch about a month ago, and Martin asked for our story of this last year and sort of the theme of Virginia men's tennis and a little bit about Brian, obviously because he was going to start working with him, and I told him just that the theme was love wins, and how we were going to have love was going to be having a lot of empathy for one another, and that's when he asked me if I'd be a part of this call, and here I am. One of the questions that I was asked, I think Brian and I were asked different questions. And before I really dive into what empathy means to me, that was one of my questions. But Larry and Brian have provided great information on it, and so I'm going to go to my second bullet point, which was to describe a situation where empathy as a coach made all the difference. Made all the difference in the athlete's performance and possibly their life. That's a little bit tricky because, again, we just never know. Brian says that 1,000 times. You just never know. I don't know if this story I'm about to tell you had anything to do with the performance of this athlete. I do know that it was a special moment and one that I'll never forget, and I don't know how much impact, if it had any, but it was a time that I expressed empathy to the player, and it led to a pretty cool experience, and again, so I would say a situation where you showed empathy, and here is the story. It's about one of my favorite players that I've ever coached. I've had about 25 players now that have been under my watch, from my private days to my times at Virginia, and now my time back at the USTA. This one was one of my favorites. He's also one of the best human beings, and we all know that those go hand in hand. This is Henrik Wiersholm. Henrik was a junior on our team this year, and Henrik was a student athlete that everyone loved, from students to fans to staff members to all of his teammates. He went into Athens 27-1 on the year, but he had just lost in the ACC final when we played Wake Forest. We ended up winning 4-3. He woke up, he had back spasms. He was telling us, I don't know if we can play. And of course, we believe so much in Henrik. We said, you're going to be fine. It's going to loosen up. The adrenaline will kick in. And what do you know, it wasn't fine. And he's losing down there and saying to himself and to Coach Bolin, who was on the court with him, if we lose this match because of me, I'm never gonna live it down. Lucky enough, we didn't lose that match, and so Henrik went into the year 27-1, but had just lost his first match of the year. He was our number 6 player. My goodness, what a number 6 to have. But that being said, number 6 always felt a tremendous amount of pressure, and you had to have a lot of empathy for those 5 and 6 guys. Put yourself in their shoes. They're some of the best juniors in the world. They go to college and they're playing 5 and 6 against guys that have UTRs that are a point below them, guys that come out there with no pressure, guys that are swinging for the fences, guys that their college coach tells them the pressure is completely on Virginia at those 2 spots. We'll try and win at 1, 2, 3, 4, where it's more of a coin flip, but you go out and have fun and do your best. And Henrik and JC were our 5 and 6, and part of the reason they were our 5 and 6 is they were the 2 greatest ultimate competitors you could find. Ultimate competitor being in Coach Bolin's eyes, someone who was willing to play anyone, anywhere, and at any time. So back to the round of 16, we're playing a very good Florida team. Henrik had a handful of match points against Florida in the round of 16 to clinch the match. He didn't close it out. It went unfinished. And then the next day we played Texas. In Texas, we're playing them in the quarterfinals now, and he didn't get to finish that one. And you could tell that the Florida match really had some effect on Henrik. You could tell that he wasn't at his best. And that really came to a head at our day off practice between the quarterfinals and the semifinals. And we're out on the practice courts. We're getting ready to play Ohio State. And there's Henrik practicing with JC, who we put them together because they love practicing together. And Henrik was as big of a disaster as Henrik could be, which again isn't very bad because Henrik's as special as they come. But he certainly was, for Henrik, at probably the worst day of his entire season, and it's our last team practice, knowing that the next 2 days that we're competing and then season's over. So Henrik's down at the fence. He's got his back against the fence. He's sitting down all alone, and that's when Coach Bolin says, "DT, Henrik needs the love. Love wins. You need to go over there and show him great empathy, and you got to find a way." And when Coach Bolin says stuff like that, you dropped everything. You consumed yourself with that person, knowing that the rest of the staff and players would take care of each other. So went over to Henrik's court. Henrik was sitting at the back of the court on the ground, and he was in tears. Sat next to him, back against the fence. You know, you're bent over, head down, and you know, that's something that I would advise that you always drop down to the level of your player when you want to show them empathy. You're not standing over the player, but I'm sitting there with him for a good 30 seconds, and I proceed to put my arm around him. Again, I've built that relationship. I've known Henrik since he was 14, so he's had my arm around him before, so it was nothing new. And I just told him I was sorry. I was sorry that he was at where he was at mentally, you know, in this stage of the tournament. Of course, it's supposed to be fun, but it's a lot of pressure, and I understand that. And I asked him to let me in on what's going on upstairs. And I needed to really try and put myself into his shoes. And that for me happens prior to the contact with the player. So walking over there, trying to visualize what's about to happen, and then also put myself into what Henrik was probably going to say, and then again try and put myself in his role. So I started off by saying, you know, let me in. What's going on? And he said, I really hate myself right now. And I asked again, why do you hate yourself? And said, because I'm being so selfish. I'm not enjoying this last journey. And for the seniors, for Coach, for you, it's the least I can do. If I can't enjoy this, the best experience anyone can ask for, then how am I going to enjoy life? And that's when empathy really comes in. You know, understanding all the pressures he's feeling to send the seniors out on top, sending Coach Bolin, the news had broke by then, so kept sending Coach Bolin out on top. Fears of the next coach. Didn't know who the next coach was going to be. The next team, recruiting had kind of fallen apart a little bit. We lost some recruits since the Bolin departure, and the team had known that I was going with them. All that uncertainty, all the unknowns, so many things to feel empathy for Henrik and sympathy for Henrik at that moment. So with my arm around him, you know, tears in both of our eyes, proceeded to tell him that he was actually enjoying the moment. He's been an amazing teammate. He's been amazing off the court, which he was. He was showing love to all of his teammates, having many laughs, enjoying himself and his teammates throughout the team bus rides, all our meals together, all our downtime, convincing him that he's totally been enjoying the journey. But he's letting, you know, that those 2 hours and his identity, which is a lot of these guys' identity, and we all have identity times where I'm a coach, no, I'm a father, no, I'm this. In this case, you know, all of our players, you know, their identity was tennis, and so he was taking those 2 hours on the court, and he was making that his 24 hours. And I told him, no, it's your 22 hours, and you've been wonderful. And that's when he said, "You're right. I'm enjoying the journey for the most part." He acknowledged that 22 hours of it. But how am I going to enjoy the 2 hours on the court tomorrow? And I tied into what Brian actually just said, which was, what he told James after, it's really admirable for James to go and win Hawaii after making a run in Australia. That says a lot about your player. That says a lot about the mentality that he had going into the tournament, because that's a really, really tough transition from third round of Australia to, court 2 or court 1 in Maui at 2:00 p.m. And for him to win that tournament, that says a lot. But if you look back on what Brian said, he said that the theme was to have fun, go out there, have fun. And for Henrik, I told him that it's all about having fun. Throw the result aside. The next day, it's going to be all about fun. And I call him Seattle's best because that was his nickname. And I said, during the match, I said it's all about fun about 25 times. And for whatever reason, who knows why, Henrik had a little fun, and he clinched that 4-2 victory over Ohio State, and that sent us to the national championship match. Just to end, I wouldn't have had that empathy as I walked over to Henrik. I put myself in his shoes, thinking of all that he's going through. I don't think I would have put my arm around him. He wouldn't have let me in. And that special moment on court 3 of the practice courts in Athens wouldn't have ever happened. A national championship would have probably still happened somehow, some way. It really felt like destiny for the team this year. Brian's last year, a lot of seniors. It was a bit of a storybook ending for all involved. But that's not what it's all about. It's about those moments like that. And I love Henrik Weirsham for sharing that special moment with me. And really, I won't ever forget it. So diving back into the questions I was presented, empathy to me. Again, this one's not about me. This is about Virginia tennis. In Virginia tennis terms, it meant constantly putting yourself in each other's shoes while trying to look through their lens and consider their story. And that story you have to dig deep to find. You really have to dig deep. You have to build that relationship, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then you also need to take into account, the cards that each and every player has been dealt. Understand their parents, understand, the apple in the tree and the tree that they fell from. And are they emotional? Do they feel the weight of the world? Were they dealt, a bit of an impulsive card? So once in a while they do throw the racket, and if they would have had 10 more seconds, they wouldn't have thrown the racket. You got to be a little empathetic if you dealt a real tough, impulsive card. And then you got to know the pressures internally and externally that they've been exposed to. So really, that's empathy for me. It's putting yourself in their shoes, but you've got to really dig deep in their story, their cards that they've been dealt, and the pressures that they have. And then how do we do that? How do we get their story? How do we get their cards? And how do we learn their pressures? We got to build a relationship. You got to establish a great relationship with your player, your child, to obtain their trust to let you in, like Henrik did on that day. You need to be empathetic. You need them to tell you their story and their whole story, their good, the bad, the ugly, from birth until present. You need to know everything they've been through, and that's really hard to get out of them. So, really quickly, how did we build relationships at Virginia? If you're a college coach out there listening, if you're an academy coach, you have teams. One activity Brian loved to do was have each player be assigned to another player and have to present a 10-minute presentation on their story, the story of the other person. This kind of came to a tune when we lost the National Indoors my first year in 2015. We lost in the quarterfinals, first time in 9 years. It was a big story that the Virginia Cavalier program was going downhill. And Brian asked if anyone knew Henrik's sister and if anyone knew both names of Mac's parents. And nobody knew that. The team thought that they were really close, but they didn't know the most important things about each other. And then Brian brought that activity, and I thought that it was really, really a really special activity and brought the team together. Time off the court, Brian talked about that earlier, and so did Larry, but especially meals with the players. We have lunch. Everybody eats breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Brian would always say, did you eat any of them alone today, DT? And, once in a while we need a meal alone. We all know that, but there's nothing like sharing a meal with a player and asking them about their life and asking them about every other topic but tennis. If you're young, doing fitness with the players, taking them on hikes, getting in the mountains, if you live in the mountains, getting at the ocean if you got an ocean, and getting in the hills if you got hills. And then lastly, sporting events. It's always fun to go to a sporting event with a player of yours, because you get to see people doing different crafts, competing differently, and you get to dive into some things maybe that haven't connected tennis-wise, and whether it be momentum or whether it be managing emotions, you could go across the board and look into other sports, and everyone shares that passion. Everyone loves sports. A majority, especially at the level that I get to work with, we all love sports, and we all love to see other athletes, doing their craft. And then lastly, letting them into your lives. Sharing the hobbies that you have. Maybe you share the same hobbies and you don't even know it. And then lastly, and most importantly, from my end, is letting them into your family life and allowing yourself, if you can allow yourself. They need to know that we have other things in life. Their tennis isn't all that we have. I have 4 kids. I have a family and a wife, and I love nothing more than having the players over for a barbecue and spending time with them, and them recognizing that's my life, not them winning or losing a tennis match, although I care deeply about them doing their best, but that's not my life, and don't have that pressure. And then having sympathy and compassion, that's another skill that I think goes a long ways. Coach Bolin, once we get into team tournament time, the ACCs and the NCAAs, he gives a hug to every player as they walk off the bus. I give them a fist pound. Coach Bolin goes full hug, says bring it in. I really think that with the millennials, you really need to hug your players, if you can. Again, hugging's not for everybody, but in my case, I just saw Steve Johnson for the first time in a long time. I spent a number of years with Stevie, spent some time with him out on tour, and we had a pretty special hug a couple days ago. Then lastly, and closing with this, for me, this is probably the most important, and something tells me I learned it from Brian Barker via Andres Pedroso, who is one of my dear friends and mentors, and Brian's his friend and mentor, and I think it got passed down to me. So, Brian, I might be stealing something from you here, but you have to be open and showing your vulnerability by telling the child or your player your personal story. You have to tell them the good, the bad, and especially the ugly. You have to show them all the mistakes that you've made, all the wiring that you wish that you tackled at a younger age. And in my case, I was very talent-based, and I was always protecting my talent. I was a very good 12-year-old and then dropped off the ladder, one of those stories. And then I was also very result-oriented. So I tell my players that, and I tell my players I had wonderful coaching. I had some of the best coaching one could ever ask for. But I didn't let them in, and B, I wish maybe that they would have said this or they said that. And I love nothing more than telling my players my story, and especially all the mistakes that I made in life, both on and off the court, because hopefully each generation as you progress gets better and better just because of that, because by the time it's 2050, we've made just about every mistake you can make, and it's all been passed down, and everyone's learned a tremendous amount from their mistakes. So that's really the end of my presentation. Sorry I went over 7 minutes, but I'd like to send it back to Larry. I know that we're going to have a question and answer session, and thank you again, Martin. Thank you again, everyone that allowed us to be a part of this tonight. It's a special topic and something that I truly value.
Thank you, Dustin. That was great, and thank you, Brian. I mean, I think you hear from these two coaches. We talk about coaches who are empathetic, the genuine caring and love for their players, putting their players first, the connection that they create, and certainly I think of the service. They really serve the players. It's not about them. It's about serving others, and I think that shines through in both of their examples. So thank you, Dustin. Thank you, Brian. We had some questions come in before the forum, so I'm gonna ask a couple of these. And if you have something, audience, that you want to send in, please send that question now. We'll try to answer it. But one question that we had, guys, is how does this empathy, does it change based on age and stage? So, how does this empathetic coaching change if you're working with children, pre-puberty, young teens, adolescents versus young adults? Does it change, and what do you see from that? Who would like to handle that one? Not everybody. Don't jump up at once.
Brian, are you there? I think
Hey Larry, can you hear me?
Right up
I
your
can
alley.
hear you. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, guys. It wasn't that I wasn't jumping on. It was just my technical expertise. I couldn't get to. I'm not trying to get to the video, but I think Dustin, first of all, that was a great talk. I've heard from so many people. I haven't talked to you in a while. I know you've been back in the day. I've heard from so many people. You do an unbelievable job, and your players love you. And I think that's one of the really biggest signs of a great coach and a special person, that the players have the love that they have for you. And I hear that from everyone. Us coaches, we all ask everyone, when we think of different coaches. Haven't talked to you in a while, and even more so the last few years, your name comes up with one of the best coaches around. So congratulations for that. That's unbelievable. And like you were saying, just about being able to put yourself in everyone's shoes. So when you're talking to a 7-year-old, you have to kind of talk like a 7-year-old. That's something that they can understand. That's not overpowering. That they don't feel intimidated. That they don't feel you're, scaring them. I know when people come into the club for the first time, especially, you just have to keep in mind that everyone's so much more nervous than you think. I think tennis players are much more nervous than you think, and when people come in for a try, whatever it might be, they're more nervous than you think. So whether it's a 50-year-old guy or a 7-year-old girl, you just have to try to talk to them at their level and make sure you understand that probably they're a little nervous and insecure about what's going on, and you just have to be very kind to them and listen. And like all of us, certainly like me, I like it when people are kind to me and nice and say nice things. So yeah, it's just about just relating, putting yourself in their shoes and relating to them no matter what age they might be.
So in your mind, Brian, it doesn't really matter what age it is. Everybody's looking for the same thing, and everybody needs to be almost treated in this way. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. No, everyone needs empathy. Everyone needs compassion. Everyone needs someone in their life that they can trust, whether they're young or old. It's equally as important to everyone. So it really doesn't matter who you're working with. It's all the same thing, is relating to the person and giving them what they need.
Okay, great. How does then the parent factor into all this? Because Brian, I hear you mention this, and I think Dustin, sorry, you did as well. In creating this connection with the player, this coach-player relationship, how does the parent factor in, and what things do you guys do to try to, in building a relationship with the player, how does that parent get involved?
Well, I think that's an extremely important part of the puzzle. And once I get to know the student really well, and they're to the point that they'll, tell me how they're feeling, that's one of the things I know from the first day that I hit with them. Eventually, I have to get to, what's your relationship with your parents? If the goal is to make every student the best they can be, certainly even if a coach does the greatest job ever done, a parent has much more influence on a student than you do. They can ruin anything that you say with a couple sentences of, "You look like you were playing terrible today. I'm so disappointed in you. I can't believe that. I'm so embarrassed." Doesn't matter how empathetic I might be or any coach might be or how much we try to build them up. The parent is by far the most important thing in a child's life. So, yes, by the time I get to know someone, I'm just working on when can I get to that question about what are your parents like, how do they treat you, what do you think about them, and when people ask.
Brian, you still there? I think we lost you, Brian.
Okay, if you want me to jump in, I can, Larry.
Yeah, please do, Dustin. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, from my take, this is really up Brian's alley, and the fact that he deals with a lot more parents in a bigger volume. For myself, who's on the pro side and then college tennis and now back at the pro side, it's really understanding the parent and if they're really the driver, or if they show a tremendous amount of empathy for their child. The tougher parents, I tend to have a little bit more empathy for the player and kind of play that role a little bit. I think to kind of contradict how they're being driven from the parents. And then, if the parents are pretty laid back and they're pretty laid off and they're really playing the role of a parent and they're not super involved, then I'm going to be a little bit, probably drive a little bit more of a driver, if that makes any sense. And not that I'm going to be less empathetic, but I'm certainly going to be a little bit the one that's pushing a little bit more. But then you also got to understand that if they grew up with great empathy, then you might want to show them empathy as well because they're used to it. And then also with the drivers, you talk about when you start coaching a Russian guy, you got to really be forceful and keep, because that's how they were raised, and you got to drive them. So, it's kind of a balancing act, and it's all about trusting your feel with it and seeing how the player responds. But you try and compliment the parent and really, again, it's about the kid, it's about the player, and getting the most out of them, and feeling what your role is to compliment the parent.
Thank you for that. I think we'll do one last question that came in from Javier. Javier asks, how does a parent find a coach like this, has the expertise in these subtleties, and points out that it can be a problem to ID a coach close to home that is competent in these kinds of things, empathetic coaching or positive coaching. Any thoughts on that, guys, and how you can help your parents maybe find that kind of coach?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Brian, are you there still?
Yes, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Brian. I think you're good.
Okay. Yeah, that's a very, very good question, and I think it's extremely important because, like we're all talking about, that's probably one of the traits that distinguishes, the top and best coaches from, very good coaches or average. And I think the way to do that is talk to the players. If you kind of get in there and you talk to, the players, your son or daughter, usually has friends. Talk to them, talk to other players that work with the coach, and just get a feel for what the coach is like. Does he get mad when you're not playing well? Does he understand you? Do you feel good? Does he make you feel good? Does he make you feel nervous? Is it someone that's fun to be around? One of the things I like to think about is tennis is hard, and at times certainly we have to quote push the kids to get the most out of them. But I think some coaches structure practice and tournaments in a way that it's fun. The whole thing is fun. Pushing yourself is fun. Doing side-to-sides to you drop is fun. And as much as possible, making it that it's a real challenge to be the best you can be and get the most out of you. And other coaches, like, let's go to work. Today we're going to work. It's time to work. And I think, in general, the coaches that do the same thing, but they call it fun, because we're all doing very close to the same thing, I think that's a good place to a good place to start if you can find someone like that, and just really by asking around, especially talking to kids.
And I'll just piggyback real quick on that. I would watch how the coach is around their players after they lose. I always love watching coaches after their players lose. I don't know if that's sick-minded or anything, but I really, whether it be in the locker room now that I'm back out here on tour, to the college coaches, because you can really see if it's about the player or if it's about the coach. And I'd say probably the most empathetic coaches that I've come in contact, it's all about the player, and it's all about the child, and it's all about the kid. And then the second component would be just asking. I mean, by now we've all read enough books as coaches that we all have our own personal philosophies. Just asking them directly, what is your philosophy? And you'll have people that are all over the board. For me, my philosophy is to bring freedom and happiness to my players. So with that word happiness, you would probably think that I'm going to be a little bit more empathetic. There's going to be coaches that say, that it's all about work and winning the tournament before the tournament, and it's all about tennis and this and that. And there's going to be coaches that say that it's all about fun and development and becoming better people first and better players second. But everyone should have a philosophy by now. Most coaches, they should have a one sentence to summarize kind of their belief, and that should really give you a light into kind of how they're going to lead your child.
Thank you, Brian and Dustin. I know that we're over time, so I appreciate the audience hanging in there through our technical difficulties. If you have more questions, you can send those to us on the email address that's on the screen. We will be answering all the questions we got before the forum and any ones that come in, and sending that back out to you in the upcoming days. I think with that, I just want to thank Brian and Dustin for their great stories and sharing some of their insights. And the personal nature of these stories really helps us understand what really happens out in the fray and in the real world of coaching. And it's amazing what you guys have done for your players in serving them as positive, empathetic coaches. I want to thank you all for being on this forum tonight on empathetic coaching, and I look forward to everyone being on these in the future as well. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it greatly, and have a good night.